What's up guys, Mike here, the Detroit Borg, and today we're checking out what's new with Android P. Right now we don't have a name, this is one of the first betas, but we have quite a few new visual tweaks and we're going to compare it side by side with Android Oreo. So as always, the changes start with the lock screen. So right now we have our ambient display and there's a few tweaks here with Android P. You'll notice that we have a percentage indicator on the lower part of the screen, which is very handy because we don't have that with Android Oreo. So we don't have to wake up our phone to find out if our battery is charged. Another visual change is the date and time, so you can see the font is a bit smaller with Android P. Now if we wake up the lock screen, you can see that has also been carried over to the lock screen. We also have these redesigned notification panels, so they're now rounded off at the corners. And if you swipe down, you get to your quick settings up top, which have again been redesigned. They're much more colorful, and we'll get into that when we get to the home screen. So at first glance, it doesn't look dramatically different, but there is a pretty significant difference in terms of the interface. First, up top, the clock has been switched from the right side to the left side. That's a pretty minor detail, but you can also see that they've sort of maxed out how much space the notification badges can take up. So right now it looks like 4 or 5 indicators in the left, and previously that used to continue going on past the center point. Now they do make a clever accommodation for this, so they actually expand out as you swipe down. So that's kind of a neat way of getting around that. So by far the biggest visual change with Android P is the new gesture-based interface, which I'm actually a big fan of. It's somewhat analogous to the iPhone 10, but there's some differences. So instead of a back, home, and recent apps key, we now have this single key with some gestures which perform similar actions. So in order to go home, you can still press that key like so. Now you can see the animation's a bit different here. So instead of sliding down, it slides over. And that alludes to the overview feature. So again, what you can do here is swipe up on that home key to get to your recent apps. You can swipe between them and open up the app you want, or just swipe to dismiss. Now to get to the app drawer on Android Oreo, you swiped up anywhere on the home screen, but with Android P, you have to swipe up specifically on that key. So this can be a little finicky, so you swipe up briefly to get to your overview and swipe up again to get to the app drawer. Now to bypass the overview, just swipe all the way up. Now if you're within an app, if you swipe quickly to the right, this will jump between the most recent 2 apps. Another trick here is if you slide the home key left and right, you can actually navigate through the recent apps viewer and actually get this feedback or haptic feedback as you toggle between the different apps. You can also just release your finger and it takes you right to that app. Now split screen is handled a bit differently with this new interface. So for example, if you go to the overview feature, in order to activate split screen, you tap the icon at the top of the app and activate split screen like so. Now you can select another compatible app from below. So for example, I can open up Chrome and YouTube side by side, resize the window, and we're pretty familiar with that type of interface. You can also select another app from your home screen, but if the app does not support it, like Instagram, it just pops right to Instagram. One of the other cool features here is that it does sort of support multitasking. So for example, I can tap and hold text within this window without actually opening up the app. So I can copy it and take it to another window. Let's say we want to go to, I'm not sure, Twitter. So if we want to tweet this out, take us to Twitter, and we can go ahead and paste it if we get that to work. Now speaking of pasting, if you tap and hold, we now get this magnifying feature here, this magnifying glass, which is kind of handy. So again, I can tap and hold and it magnifies over the text. Now this is something we're pretty familiar with on iOS, but it's new for Android. Now we still get a back button, but it only appears when it's needed. So obviously if you jump from the home screen to an app, if you go back, it just takes you back to the home screen. Speaking of that back button, it's no longer solid like it was with Android Oreo. So as you can see, this is a pretty significant change in terms of recent apps. So instead of this accordion style stacked interface with drag and drops to activate split screen, it's now integrated into this overview design. Now if you don't like this interface, you can turn it off. In fact, it's off by default. So if you go to settings, all you have to do is go to system and go to gestures. So under gestures, you can actually turn off swipe up on home button. Now if you turn that off, it reactivates the standard Android keys. So if you take a look at the standard Android interface, you still get the updated overview design, but you lose the gesture interface. Also worth pointing out here is that the apps at the bottom of this overview screen are the same apps that are recommended at the top of the app drawer. So basically these are apps that the system determines you use a lot, so they might be useful to you if they're right here every time you swipe up. up. Of course, a long press of the home key will take you right to the Google Assistant. So getting to the redesigned notification shade, you can see the quick setting toggles up top are much bolder, but you can also see the design is more of a floating look. So the notification area is rounded off, and it's more distinctly separated from the quick setting toggles up top, which you can expand out. You can also see that the space above the quick settings has been blacked out, which is to make some accommodation for the notch style design that we're seeing with most smartphones today. So in addition to redesigning the icons so they're more uniform, they're also using blue to indicate when the feature is turned on. So for example, if I turn the flashlight on with Android Oreo, it just turns black. It's not necessarily as clear as this bright blue color. Now something that's a little disappointing here is that some of these icons no longer have those shortcuts. So for example, with Wi-Fi, you can quickly jump to different Wi-Fi networks without going to the settings panel. So if I want to do that with Android P, I actually have to tap and hold to get to the settings panel. So one of these toggles is auto rotate, which is not a terribly remarkable feature, but it does behave a bit differently with Android P. So if I turn off auto rotate here, and I go to an app and rotate the phone to landscape orientation, I get this indicator in the upper right or lower right corner that tells me that I can select auto rotate to flip it back to landscape orientation. So I think that's pretty clever. Same thing when you upright it to portrait mode, you get that indicator. So it allows you to temporarily switch back to portrait mode. So it doesn't turn off the auto rotate toggle. It just allows you to switch between landscape and portrait for that specific instance. Do Not Disturb also picks up a bunch of new features. So as I activate it, you can see all of the notifications disappeared. And that's because Do Not Disturb now allows you to mute any visual disturbances. So it prevents you from wanting to check any indicator that tells you that you have notifications. Now, you can highly customize that. So if you long press to get to the control panel for this, we have block visual disturbances. So you can turn some of this off. So for example, you can prevent the phone from waking up for notifications, from blinking the light, from turning on the screen. You can even hide the notification dots on the apps so they don't tempt you to check them out. Now, the home screen editor has also been tweaked here. So if you long press, this pops out the home screen editor for Android Oreo, but with Android P, you get this option box. So we have home settings. We also have home settings right here. It takes us to a pretty familiar interface. If you long press on the power key, we still have power off and restart, but we now have screenshot. So this will take a quick screenshot of whatever screen we're on right now. Then you can jump right to the screenshot to edit it. So this allows you to quickly edit and mark up the screenshot without having to go to the gallery to get back to it. They've also made a clever tweak to the volume controls. So when you press the volume key, now they appear next to the volume key where your thumb or your finger is, which I think makes a lot more sense. So now I have the option to adjust the volume like so, or I can use my thumb instead as well. Or I can select Do Not Disturb, or I can go to settings to adjust the volume for my ringer and more. The Settings app also gets a visual refresh, so we have more colorful icons and a more rounded off design. But for the most part, the content here is pretty much carried over unchanged. Now, something that's been talked about a lot with Android P is the cutout accommodation for displays that look a lot like the iPhone X. So for example, if you go to developer options, we have the option to simulate a display cutout for 3 types of phones. So we have a corner display cutout, which I don't think I've seen before. So you have a camera in the corner, you can select that. So again, this is for developers. This isn't for people to select. The phone maker will select this automatically for you. You also have double display cutout. So you'll see that everything up here is sort of resized and repackaged for that cutout. You can see down below as well. And the thing that most represents what we're seeing now is the tall display cutout. So you have a cutout toward the top for the camera and speaker. And again, it resizes all the content for that cutout. Now the interface really isn't that similar to the iPhone X. So for example, to go back, you swipe up on iPhone X and you press the home key on Android P. Now you can invoke the app overview feature in a very similar way. So you just swipe up from the bottom to get to it. So that's pretty similar. Now what I like better on the iPhone is that you can swipe between your apps just by swiping across on the bottom. So it doesn't switch just between the recent apps, you can switch between all of your apps. So with Android P, it just switches between the last 2 apps. Alright guys, so that's going to do for me with this quick look at what's new with Android P. Of course, there's a few other things under the hood, such as AI enhancements to battery saving, as well as app suggestions, and much more. But for now, that should cover all the visual and interface changes you should see coming to your Android phone sometime in the future. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, please let me know with a like, and I'll see you again in my next video.